Share live here on this Tuesday morning as we come to you live here from Click Here Digital Studios, as we are brought to you daily by our friends over at Barker Brothers Plumbing and Works. Stop and see Jude today. Give them a call, 776-2431. No website, no social media for Barker Bros. Couple of trucks in Baton Rouge every single day. They're located over in Plaquemine. Hit them today, 776-2431. Residential or commercial plumbing needs. Mention the show and save 15%. It is good to catch up with our guy, Wilson Alexander. It's been a busy football season as it's coming to an end here. The Tigers were in the Texas Bowl last week. They continue to recruit the portal and look towards spring. Our guy, Wilson Alexander, seemingly does not take a day off. I know it's been a hell of a season for Wilson on the grind, but another one in the rearview mirror as LSU comes to a halt with 9 wins, including the bowl win versus Baylor, and heads into an offseason where it's had some fireworks here early on as the Tigers have done a really good job in the portal. They've got some stories around the offseason, and we dive into it with the best in the business, Wilson Alexander, who joins us from The Advocate and NOLA.com. Good to see him on this Tuesday morning. Wilson, Happy New Year. Good to see you, my man.
Happy New Year. Good morning to y'all. How you doing?
Doing good. Let's talk about the portal success. Let's start there. I think that was, Brian Kelly going back to a regular season press conference. Wilson said, look, we're keeping receipts. We're going into the offseason, and we expect to play for a national championship. His work in the transfer portal proves that he has kind of put his money where his mouth is. What do you make of what they have done in signing this portal class?
Well, it's certainly been the story of the offseason. I mean, LSU needed to make this roster better, and it appears that it has done so. Now, a note of caution, obviously, it's really hard to fully predict or accurately predict, I should say, what you're going to get out of a transfer portal class. We saw, Ole Miss sign the number 1 portal class in the country last year and finished 9-3. So now it's on LSU to take what appears to be a talented class, one of the most talented transfer classes in the country, up there with Ole Miss and Texas Tech and some others, and actually convert that into wins and, develop some of those players, because some of them need to take steps forward. I mean, we look at a guy, Jack Pyburn comes to mind. He didn't really have much pass rush production at Florida, even though he was a solid run defender on the edge. So LSU's got to maybe develop him there. Someone like Patrick Payton kind of, had shown flashes at Florida State, but this past season didn't have the best year. So, you got to get him to be more consistent throughout an entire seaand develop him with Kevin Peoples to maybe become more like Braden Swinson was this past year, be a really good edge rusher, and maybe even exceed that kind of thing. Some of these guys got to take a few steps forward. Some of them got to stay healthy, like Nick Anderson. But you do have a lot of talent in here, and not only guys who are, in the top 100, quite a few of them rankings, whether it's 24/7 or ESPN or what have you, but also guys that have some experience. And what I think they've done really is they've identified a lot of needs on this roster, and they've almost entirely filled them. We'll see, and that's an accomplishment in and of itself, because there's a lot of teams that are going after these transfers, and they've fended some other teams off for some of these really top guys. And so, now they've just got to finish it off. Safety and probably offensive line and maybe another backup tight end. So there's probably still 3 or 4 transfers out there that they need to go and get.
Wilson, what'd you make of their roster retention of the guys that were on the fence, that either had a choice of leaving and coming back? They had some successes. They had some guys that they maybe expected to come back. What did you make of all in all the decisions that were made?
By and large, they've done a really good job of retention. You see, 19 players leave. What do you mean they've done a good job of retention kind of thing? Well, most of them weren't on the 2 deep. CJ Daniels leaving, that was a surprise. Didn't see that one coming. That was probably someone that was definitely something they would have liked to have kept around. Kamorian Penton, maybe the same thing. Losing him, I don't think they liked losing him. But you look at it, and I mean, most of them are guys who are further down the depth chart who maybe over the course of their career they could have cracked the starting rotation or grown into rotational roles. But for a team that needs to really take a step up next year, they probably weren't going to contribute. Deshaun Womack is maybe another loss, but also somebody who hadn't necessarily turned into met those expectations of a 5-star yet. But I mean, again, by and large, you were able to get a lot of guys to come back. And even with Garrett Nussmeier and Harold Perkins, I guess they went maybe 2 for 4 on draft eligible players who were seriously considering going to the draft. Obviously losing Mason Taylor and Emory Jones, they were especially Emory and Mason were both guys that they made a pitch to come back, and Emory took a little bit longer with his decision, but ultimately decides to go. But still, you get 2 guys there who are really talented players on your football team to come back in Nussmeier and in Harold. So I think they've done a good job with retention. That's something that's still, even with LSU now this year, kind of shifting toward a heavier focus on the portal. A big part of this roster building philosophy is retention. That's the way it is across the country. You want to retain your best players, and they've done a pretty good job of that.
How big was the story of Nussmeier coming back?
It's huge if your starting quarterback returns. Especially after Bryce Underwood, flips to Michigan. At least in my mind, I saw it as, okay, well, the number one thing in the offseason has to be getting Garrett back, because otherwise you're competing for a quarterback in the transfer portal. And while there are ones out there, we saw a guy like John Mateer go to Oklahoma. And, there's a lot of teams competing for that spot. It also becomes very expensive. And if you want to add to other positions on your roster, maybe you want to be able to just retain the quarterback you've already got, pay him whatever, he's looking for, and not have to worry about that position for a starter in the portal, just because you're really rolling the dice there. And so, to give a known quantity like Garrett back and now try to help him take that year 2 leap that we've seen around here recently is huge for this team. And we saw in the Texas Bowl how good he can be. We really saw it. Now he's just got probably in LSU's biggest games next year. He just needs to play better. In LSU need over the offseason here with Joe Sloan and in his quarterback development in general, just needs to continue to take those steps forward so that he's a little bit more consistent, better with management of the football, so he's not turning it over as much as he did this season, and he can be again one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC.
Trey'z Green went through a position change earlier in the season. He became one of the top targets later in the year, and then in the bowl game, you could see that there is a lot of promise around this young guy going into the future. There's also a possibility that he may join the basketball team. It's very rare to see this done. What do you hear on the latest there? Because I'd imagine if a decision is to be made, it should be made here in the next couple of days.
As Trey'z Green was walking off the field at the Texas Bowl, we looked at him and said, "Are you playing basketball next week? Or are you playing basketball soon?" And he goes, "Next week."
Let's go.
And so and those were his words. He said at that time that he was going to be joining the basketball team. I guess that would make it this week at some point. But I don't know what has happened since then in terms of his
Brian Kelly.
The basketball team. Obviously, that was something that he wanted to do. But also, how much is he going to get on the court necessarily? He didn't get to. He's been a long time off since of basketball, and he's kind of joining mid-season. I don't know what. It's hard to gauge what kind of impact he would have. That'd be a better question for probably Matt McMahon if he does end up on the team. But as a tight end, oh man, he looked awesome in the Texas Bowl, as everybody knows, and I think gives LSU a lot of confidence in that position moving forward now. With because like you said, in the middle of the year, you sort of split him out wide. He's not ready to do the inline blocking, and now it looks like okay, well he can probably just be one of your tight ends. You don't have to really try to find a spot for him as a receiver. You can just kind of do everything again. And so it was really funny talking to Garrett after that game, after the Texas Bowl, and he was recounting a conversation with Trey'z a few weeks earlier. And Trey'z started this, the way that Garrett described his voice, it sounded like this, like really eager freshman, like, do you really think I'm going to score once or maybe even twice in the game? And Garrett's like, yeah, man, you're really good. And then told him again afterward, I told you, when he found him twice in the end zone. So if Trey'z Green can continue to build on that going to next year, then LSU's got a true weapon there at tight end, along with Bauer Sharp and maybe whoever else they add in the portal.
You mentioned C.J. Daniels and the loss of him early on in the interview, but you look at the weapons that they return and that they add to the mix here for Nussmeier. We were talking about the running back spot before you came on, Wilson. I think there's some high expectation for that position to improve over the offseason. What do you make of the weapons that they have added to the next season's look?
Yeah, I mean, bringing in Brown, I think, is a great addition to kind of start it off with here because he's somebody who's got a little bit more proven experience in the SEC. I mean, he's played 3 full seasons at Kentucky, and if he actually has good quarterback play like he'll have with Garrett Nussmeier, then this is a guy with a lot of speed who can really move well in space, and he's an electric kick returner on top of that with 5 kick return touchdowns. And then Nick Anderson is, I mean, the 6'4" kind of target. Somebody who has got a lot of athleticism, not necessarily the quite the same speed as a guy like Chris Hilton or maybe even Barry Brown, but somebody who can still get himself open and make plays down the field. And then I mean those are really the two that pop in terms of what they've added in return as weapons. And you bring them along with Aaron Anderson, and Chris Hilton with what he showed the last 2 games of the season. With, oh my gosh, I mean, if he can just stay healthy for an entire year, like we've been talking about his whole career, then that's somebody who's a burner. And LSU needs that kind of element. I think Barry Brown brings it too, to stretch the field vertically. We saw how much better the offense looked, even though it was in the last 2 games. It was against Oklahoma and against Baylor, and it wasn't against really in their losses, the top teams that they played. But it feels like the offense could make a huge step forward if they are able to have a couple of guys who can stretch the field vertically, and Barry and Brown should be able to provide that as well. But Trey'z is able to do what he did in the bowl game over the course of a full season. If, like you said, that running back position is as productive as looks like it could be on paper with Caden Durham and Harlan Berry and JT Lindsey, and maybe Caleb Jackson can improve going into his offseason, then you do have some weapons there. Now you just got to kind of figure things out on the offensive line because obviously everything needs enough time to operate and enough space to get open.
Some of these young guys that we saw for the first time in the bowl game popped a little bit. Tylen Singleton jumped out, especially on that kickoff return where he was showing his speed. And I think that linebacking room has inserted a ton of speed over the last 2 years. Do you see anybody from a young standpoint in the bowl or maybe even somebody in this offseason that you're looking forward to see in spring because we didn't see the majority of him in the regular season?
Yeah, I mean, the name that comes to mind is Tyree Adams, and I don't know how much in the spring we'll be able to get a gauge of like how much progress he's making, just because with the access that we obviously get to watch practice, and thank you to LSU for that. But it's sometimes hard to really understand, like as an offensive lineman taking steps forward kind of thing. But that's somebody who I think everybody's going to have an eye on because I mean he might be the starter at left tackle next year. And he looked really good in the bowl game. Obviously part of an offensive line that didn't give up the sack, making his first career start at left tackle. We're so used to Will Campbell there for the past 3 years, and here's Tyree Adams. Can he step into that role? And at least in the bowl game, it was a good starting point. And then the other one that comes to mind is, even though we've seen him a lot over the last month of the season, was Devon Keys. I mean, that interception. But also, I mean, he just really grew over the last month of the season. I mean, a guy who was kind of flying around, making a bunch of tackles. You heard his name a lot over the PA when, keys on the tackle. And that's somebody who I think that LSU has a good bit of confidence in now moving forward. In addition to guys like Singleton and Trey'z Green. And, this freshman class seemed to really rise up over the last few weeks here, some pieces of that they can continue to build on moving forward. Another one would be Deshaun Spears. He played a little bit more in the bowl game, didn't necessarily flash. I don't remember him making a ton of plays, but somebody who, they need to really see if he can step into a more of a contributing role at safety next season.
From the new faces standpoint, this is the time of the year where you see things get shaken up from a roster standpoint. You also see staff changes around this time of the year, and I know Todd Fitch agreed or just was named Charlotte's offensive coordinator along with the associate head coach. He's been serving as a senior offensive analyst for LSU. Do you expect? What do you expect from the staff here?
Well, obviously Brian Kelly's still got to go find the tight ends or special coordinator. How exactly he wants to sort of divide those titles or spread them around, we'll see. That's the main opening, and then does he make an evaluation on the offensive side and decide to make a change of any kind? I don't know that he will or if he won't. It's something he at least has to look at and evaluate after the way the offense kind of dropped off over the course of the year, during only scoring 17 points per game during that losing streak. He's just got to be able to kind of look at it and see if he wants to do anything. I don't know that he will, but we'll see. And then in terms of guys like Fitch and Kanan Ray, he was another analyst who took a job at Tulane. There's going to be a lot of that, a lot of turnover in terms of analysts. At least I would anticipate it, just because there is pretty much every year. And Fitch was someone who, as I understand, Charlotte was kind of trying to get the last few years, and finally this season he agreed to it. He's a former offensive coordinator. Now he goes back into an offensive coordinator role there at Charlotte. And so there'll probably be more instances of that. Is there's a major on-field assistant move happen? I don't know, but I would anticipate a few of those sorts of analyst positions kind of get shuffled around across the country.
Wilson, great news as always. Great insight as always. We appreciate it. Thank you for everything that you did for us during the year and covering LSU and being insightful with us every week here. We will catch up